Welcome to the Living Wholehearted podcast, where we're helping leaders live with integrity.
Whether you're a mom or a CEO, you're a leader, and how you lead matters.
Well, Jeff and I are hanging out at our Living Wholehearted podcast. We don't have a lot of places to go right now as we're in the middle of the Covid-19 lockdown. You're all in the same boat. And our last episode, we processed more about the anxiety and the intensity of emotions that are coming from all over. But we wanted to shift our gears a little bit more towards leadership and how this is impacting leaders. What does good leadership look like at a time like this, especially in the middle of a crisis? So I'm going to interview my husband, Jeff. So Jeff, you're walking alongside a lot of leaders at different organizations. Help us understand what are some of the things that you're hearing right now?
Well, many of you that are listening are in this boat, and as organizational leaders at different levels within your business or nonprofit, or it may be one you started and you're at the top of the org chart here, and everything changed. Everything changed overnight for these individuals, particularly those that are in that space as a leader and overseeing any number of people, from one to thousands. And the complexity increases, of course, with the size that increases of a business or nonprofit. But I've heard from my clients, I reached out and checked in with them just to communicate care. And it was, some of them couldn't even respond. Mm-hmm. They were just and even us on a smaller scale, we're putting out all kinds of fires and challenges and trying to really quickly figure out systems that could be in place and respond to governors' requirements, not necessarily guidelines, but even mandates. And that, for our business, it certainly impacted us. And we had to go from being able to see people in person in our professional counseling and organizational development firm in our city to having to shift to virtual. And that's one of many things that people are having to shift entirely. Some businesses were more prepared for that because they were using virtual platforms for years. And for them, it's the reports from folks that are in that situation is that that's at least one thing we didn't have to think about. Others were scrambling to try to figure out how to do that. And in many scenarios where HIPAA compliance was and had been forever a requirement, that being made flexible by the president and on lowering some of those penalties, no fear of penalties for some of those other platforms, you have leaders thinking about their people. That's the primary thing. One leader that I spoke to said, "Thanks for thinking about me, but please say a prayer for my people, the people that I'm going to have to let go." We're not just talking about one or two, and even that can be so hard, especially if you know the story behind those families that are represented by the individuals. But if you're dealing with hundreds or more, I mean, this can be so difficult, especially with how you might be wired. The people, and we know that, and this isn't something that you just say tritely, we're people who are in these positions and leaders that are followers of Christ. It's just as hard. And yet we are holding on to what we know to be true, which is that God is not going to forget anybody that is having to be laid off or at a decision that you have to make for your business or nonprofit. He's there with them, and we may not see or know how. And I'm trying to encourage business and organizational leaders that are having those kinds of conversations to turn towards their people, to do whatever they can, and they already are thinking that way, to be as gracious and as loving in this process, pulling their resources, getting creative as to what kinds of options they can do in continued support, really going to bat. They also have to take care of themselves at the same time. You can't give what you don't have. And leaders are notorious, right? They're notorious for, even before these crises, for overtaxing themselves with everybody else's needs, forgetting their own, and leaking, and not knowing that they're not saving the best for those that they even have that they love the most.
Yeah. So on one hand, you're saying be creative, dive in, pursue your people. And on the other hand, you're saying, but also remember not to burn out yourself.
That's right.
How does a leader do that when they're in the middle of a crisis and literally putting out fires?
The thing to do is to not to isolate. If you're trying to isolate because you have, and leaders are classic at saying this, I have so many things I have to do. They tell their spouses that, they tell their kids that, and it may be true, and it probably is true, and they're probably all amazing and good things on the behalf of others, but leaders have to be mindful of that tendency and need to save some of the best for those that they love the most. And they also have to have some self-care in this. Otherwise, you're going to be no good for no one. And so it's something that leaders who understand this rhythm outside of conflict can apply in conflict. And it's hard for them to do, and it's hard for us to do in challenges like we're facing right now. But it is the process of grounding and staying present. It allows you to be of a sound mind, to actually see what and come up with solutions and stay creative rather than getting locked down into fight, flight, or freeze.
Well, I think what's challenging is a lot of leaders aren't aware of their turning point when they start to get hijacked by their amygdala and start to go into fight, flight, or freeze. And so let's talk a little bit about cues for that right now. Part of when crises happens, you often practice what you've been doing in normal life. And so if you can pause and go, okay, what are the things that have helped me to stay calm, cool, and collected over time? And so if you worked out pretty regularly, then you don't want to give that up in crises. If you eat well, you don't want to give that up. What are some of the things that you are doing so that you're not flipping your lid in the middle of this crisis?
Yeah, well, we've talked about it in the last podcast of just different ways in which we ground ourselves, our bodies, our minds, and that is reminding us of things that are true. That's a huge part of it, and so staying grounded in whatever your routine is, whatever things you're practicing, whatever disciplines that you have, allows you to then step in to other people's spaces when they aren't actually grounded yet. So you can't give what you don't have. And if your lid is flipped, as we get from Dr. Dan Siegel's work, when your brain is on fire, when you're hijacked, if you will, by your experiences in fight, flight, or freeze, you're not in a place where you can rationally do much about anybody else's things other than live in a conflict space with them. So we want to be able to try to give the best of what we can with what we've got. It's staying connected to some other people. It's not being a lone ranger. We know that isolation in leadership is a huge vulnerability, and that can become so much more problematic in crises. So it's having your people and keeping your circle small, talking to people. It's sharing some of these experiences with other business and organizational leaders experiencing the same thing. It's pulling together the talent and creativity and the heart that you have within your organizations and with people. One thing you asked what did I do? What did we do? Well, we brought our team that we have professionally together in a virtual team meeting when it was the first one we've ever done. And we actually just needed to see each other's faces, laugh, and to ask each other, what have you been doing and what's going on? And we had one of our teammates just had a baby, and it was so fun to see the baby on the screen. And there's nothing like new life to bring joy and hope. And she was just tuning into the meeting, but there was her baby was awesome. And others, we talked about some of the hardships that we're having. Just a sense, we're humans at the end of the day. And we need each other. We're not made to be isolated. And so those are a couple things that I've done, reminding myself of things that are true and trying to stay grounded there. And then also staying connected to the people I need to stay connected to so that they know that I am in this with them and that I don't feel alone actually either.
Yeah. And something I've done is I did a virtual happy hour and just trying to stay connected to friends, being able to just hang out online right now, virtually. And it's definitely different, but that isolation is key for leaders, and making sure that we're doing some ordinary stuff too in the middle of putting out fires. So sitting down and having dinner with your family, even though it might be easier, it can still feel harder because there's so many crises to put out. So that is just kind of thinking about those rhythms of taking a lunch break, being able to go outside and go for a walk and breathe fresh air and not just be on the phone all day calling all your people.
When you do things, when you're doing things for those things for the right reasons, and the right reason is so that you can actually have something to give to others, and specifically those that you love the most, but those in your care, you can do that in confidence. You're giving yourself permission to do something that's good for not just you, but for others. And that's actually a motivation that I tap into and encourage my clients, my leadership clients, to hold onto in their motivation.
Yeah, and something that often comes up with leaders is when you have to lay someone off. You mentioned it earlier, of just the weight of all of the consequences.
It's like a survivor's guilt.
It is. And yet that truth, going back to what is true, is if we are grounded, if we're spending time listening to what God is asking us to do in the middle of these times, and not just reacting, but we're actually responding with our ear into the tune of what God is asking, then we can trust Him with the consequences. Whatever's being shifted right now is on purpose for greater things that He's doing, but to trust Him with the consequences of what we have to do today. But
we're not saying that God's created all this. He's just not wasting it.
No, yeah, thanks for clarifying that, because no, that's not what I meant. But what I am saying is that He will use it, and He will use it in the lives of every single person in our wake. But the trusting Him that He has them is really that truth piece. I often, as a big relational person, have a hard time making decisions like that. And so I have to lean into a big truth that says, my job is to obey, and your job, God, is to take care of the rest. So really listening, but not reacting. And I think during crises, oftentimes people will make decisions that they're not thinking through the long-term systemic impact. And so slowing down, what does slowing down look like for a leader if they're going to actually make these key decisions? I mean, we're only in a couple weeks. I keep thinking about that. It feels like months, but we're only in a couple weeks.
Well, yeah. I mean, from somebody who's been laid off before,
yeah,
and I've had a couple of different experiences in my career, if you will, of doing all kinds of things before we got to doing Living Wholehearted back in 2011. I can tell you that I know when the leader that gave me that news, and in one case it happened with 70 people in one day, and we were just called to a floor, and an announcement was made and boxes were given, and it was you were out within a 2-hour window. In another case, it had been in a one-to-one situation, but I got a lot of respect for the persons that took the time to describe this, and they didn't. They gave the truth and the reality in a way that I could understand. Was I happy about it? No, but when I understood the situations and the reasons behind it, and I could sense that they were telling the truth, I could accept that information. And then on a personal level, my faith is what would ground me, not knowing what that meant and all the details. And you walked with me through one of those situations, and through both of those situations. Yeah. Yeah, you're right.
I've been there a long time.
You have been there a long time. And so the truth of knowing that I just lost my job, and yet I have peace, and that, where does that come from? It comes from God. And then unpacking all of that space, I can receive that news of a layoff, and actually have peace, because my peace isn't held within my job or in my role there. My peace is secure in my identity as it relates to being a child of God. And it's rubber meets the road in those situations. And it's not like it stayed with me like I was 100% peaceful because I'm a child of God through the whole thing. No, that's not real. That's not true. There's a lot of struggle in all of that. And you were there, and we struggled together through those things. But those anchor points never left us. And we still are there today, even though those layoffs took place. So I'd say circumstances like what we've got here increase the difficulty on so many levels. But how do you lead through those things with people who are in your wake of influence?
Well, before we go further, I want to add to those stories. Is in 2001, when 9/11 happened in that first layoff, we both were in that layoff. And it was an opportunity for us to pivot, to move forward on some things that God had already been stirring in us. So we moved to Oregon. I started grad school. There were things that came out of that we kind of had our heels to the ground on.
God created just a highway lane to start on some of those things that we're experiencing today.
And then time two was 2008, 2009 with the economy turn, and there were just lots of downsizing at the time. And we had babies. I was self-employed. We didn't have another income. And so when that came our way, it was really scary. And we were brushing our teeth. And I remember we had already been talking about grad school probably for about 5 years.
This is the day I got the news. Yeah.
And you got the news. And
we're brushing our teeth
and
that
we were
night.
brushing our teeth. And we're like, well, maybe it's time. And so you started grad school.
I went online that night, and the application deadline was that next day. And we stayed up all night working on that thing together.
And just the sense, that piece of there's something else here. There's something else here. And not soon after was Living Wholehearted. We started to put the puzzle pieces together, and Living Wholehearted was birthed from that situation. And so if you had been still working in that role, we wouldn't have had that shift either. And I just think of that now for times like this, not only as the person being laid off, but as the leader laying someone off.
That's right.
Just really holding out the possibilities, and the struggle is a part of, I love that butterfly analogy. There has to be a struggle for that butterfly to be able to grow muscles for the wings. And if they don't struggle out of the cocoon, they will not be able to fly. And it seems cheesy, but it's
they literally die.
Yeah, they literally die.
Or they burn in the sunshine.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to put some trite saying to these times, but I think, again, to kind of put words to what Trueface, our friends at Trueface, always say, is that grace sees the long haul, or takes the long view, and to recognize that there's a bigger picture. So with the intensity of what's happening right now, and the choices we have to make, and the decisions that we have to make, can I step back and go, okay, there might be some creativity and innovation that comes out of this.
There can be. Yeah, it's some of the most incredible things that happen in life happen in the struggle, and then on the other side of it too. And that's not just pie in the sky talk to make ourselves feel better. It actually happened to us. It's happened to so many people we've sat with in the trenches where they couldn't see it. And we were there with them long enough in friendships, client relationships, and we saw them on the other side, and we could celebrate actually.
Yeah.
And it's okay to not be, some people are celebrating right now, things like, again, family dinners and time to do things that they've never spent with their kids. And others at the same time are weeping, are grieving, are angry. Yeah. And sometimes the same person can feel all those things, right? At the same time right now for different reasons. And we got to name those things. We got to experience those things. And hopefully you have some people in your world, whether at home or work or play, that you can do that honestly with.
I'd love to end with a little bit of, again, the leader who's used to being at work 40, 50, 60 hours a week, and now they're home with the kids and with their wife or husband, and it's a whole different ball game of what do you do with your time. So I just think there's some great innovation, and it can feel annoying at times. It can feel like you want to escape. You don't have your typical places to go. But how to press in, how to lean into this actual gift of time for that leader. When you know the job is going to come back, the intensity of work is going to come back, but for right now, there's a pause. So let's just name a couple things, you and I. Why don't you start, Jeff, with just some ways that leaders can be intentional in the home as they lead their families?
Yeah. Well, part of that is taking care of the things that you need to take care of for you in your heart, mind, and spirit. And so, many people used to commute, right? Used to commute, meaning a couple weeks ago, right? 3 weeks ago.
17
And
some
people's commutes used to be times where they podcasted, they prayed, they just zoned out, they had a quiet space, and now that's gone. Well, it doesn't have to be gone. You literally can take a step out your door. You can go for a walk solo, social distancing, what have you, and you can have that time and insert that time into your morning, right? Redeem that time in a new way, in a different way. You still need that refreshment, and it's a way of starting your day. So that's one idea. You've lost a commute, but you can change the way in which you spent that time.
Yeah, and you might have to actually talk with your spouse about tag teaming that a little bit more. Just so don't assume that commute is yours because it was before.
I'm taking my commute. That's not going to go well. But
yeah. So just talk about what that looks like and recognize
Carpooling.
that both parties in the house need that. And I heard one mom saying that she gets 2 walks a day and her husband gets to have the door closed and nobody gets to talk to him for a couple hours out of the day. And so that's their tag team.
Create the structure, right? And then if they have kids, they tell the kids kind of what to expect so that no one is walking on eggshells, and those little systems create freedom.
Totally. So one of
What's
the
something
things,
else?
Yeah, you know what? We haven't done this, but I thought it was a fabulous idea from our friends who they went through their game closet. They named every single game
on a piece of paper,
put it in a jar, and they're taking use of the time by every day going through, and one of the kids gets to pull a name of a game, and they're going to actually play their way through this quarantine, playing games that they normally have never played before. It's a way to pace the time. It's a way for the kids to feel like they get to choose something, have some power and control in the house.
There's games that they had that like for 5 years is what they said that were still in the box that they hadn't even opened up yet.
I loved it. So
okay.
That was a creative way of using the time intentionally. So they are playing a game a day, and that's really huge. And one thing that we talk about all the time that I think applies right now is just because you're around doesn't mean you're having quality time. And so spending 30 minutes a week with each of your kids with intentional, uninterrupted time that they get to choose. And so guess what I did yesterday? Nevi asked me to do a fashion show with my clothes. So she went in through my closet, picked out outfits for me. And then I got to model and she took pictures. And it was only 30 minutes, but it was significant for her to fill her bucket because just because we're together doesn't necessarily mean she's getting all my attention. And there's still that feeling of aloneness for kids, even though their parents are around more. So being intentional that way, both parents trying to find that quality time with their kids, just 30 minutes a week. I'm not saying a day, a week.
Yeah. I'd say another thing too is that, I know that leaders in general have been challenged. Parents have been challenged. Those that are used to going into the office for work and now don't have that. They're working from home. All the challenges of media, from phones to computer to all the technological tools that we were already trying to monitor in terms of when we're around our significant others and kids has now we don't have the option, and yet you do still have some choices to make. One of the things that we're doing and others are doing is they're staying up later or they're getting up earlier, and some of you were already doing that, and so I'm not trying to tell anybody what their schedule needs to be, but if it comes to spending that 30 minutes with my child or children individually on a given, trying to map that out, or spending time answering emails that I don't have to, but that I know are building up in my inbox, I can spend those times with my kids during their waking hours as those 30-minute chunks, and then I can recoup that time in the later hours, and I'll survive, and I won't have any regrets about pouring those deposits into my people. I would have regrets of not doing that, and of course, spending those times pouring into things that don't mean as much.
That's good. That's really good. And one last one: think of creatively of how you can include your kids into what you are doing. So dinners, I am inviting my children to help with dinner, but it's more of a relational time. It's going to slow me down. It's going to get messier. Intentionally bringing them outside if you're going to be doing some yard work. Thinking about this being quality time. Consider it part of homeschooling. Hey, everything could be a lesson.
Yeah, I mean, even just if you have, we have a lot of animals, and everybody usually has a different animal to chore, but it's saying, hey, let's do them together.
Yeah.
Let's actually do all of them together.
Finding ways to do that. So having your alone time, but also then figuring out ways where there's intentional togetherness, that meal a day, if it's breakfast or it's dinner, however it is, but try not to overshoot the moon and schedule every single meal all together because now we're quarantined. Everybody's wiring is very different, as we've talked about in many cases, and people still are introverts, even though they are around you all the time. And the extrovert is going nuts because they're getting bored with just the family.
Our youngest has had some body angst going on, kind of like Mama does and Dad.
I do.
Just where it's like we got to get moving, and she'd been playing. Well, both girls have been playing sports for a long time, but our youngest just is that physical mover, needs, and it was the funniest thing. I just, she just started track as a fifth grader. And that's when I started track and field as a fifth grader. She only had 1 or 2 practices before this whole COVID thing shut everything down. And it occurred to me that I could actually go on my first run with my youngest. And so we did our little gravel driveway. It's a 1/4 mile. But then we came down into the lower shop, and I made up a little workout thing. We're doing lunges. We're doing those the push-ups, jumping jacks. We hit the punching bag together, and we were laughing, but we literally got a good sweat. It was pretty great. Then we ended with pull-ups, and I learned that she could do 3, and I was happy that I could still do 5, and I need to increase that. So it's like, I mean, am I doing that every multiple times a week with my youngest? Probably not, but probably I could do once a week with her, and it'd be fun to include.
I love it. That's creative. So it is interesting times as a leader, whether you're in the home, work, and in the community. We haven't talked about ministry leaders, but we've got some information on our latest blog. If you're a ministry leader, we put something up there that talks a little bit more of how to walk alongside your volunteers. If you're in church ministry, check out our website, livingwholehearted.com, or make sure you subscribe because we've got more coming.
To this podcast.
To this podcast. And we've got a ton more interviews coming our way. But in the end, we're just grateful. We're grateful to be able to share these seasons with you, to know that we're in it. We're leaders, we're parents, we're husband and wife, and we're just really
business owners, and we're right there with you. We're struggling with all this, trying to practice what we preach.
And just know that our humanity does get in the way a bit, but God is still in control at the end of the day. And so we're praying that these will be encouraging to you and bring hope and maybe even a sense of some good in your day. Thank you for joining us in being a leader committed to shrinking the integrity gap between the values we espouse and the values we actually live out in practice.